Shut up and sit down.
Hey everybody, this is Tony Day. Today I'm going to go over with you what I promised, which was talk about the bee's knees video and how I color graded it. And you're going to see that I didn't really have to do a whole lot with this in order to get what I did. Some of the things that people were saying was they were talking about punchy colors and the deep blacks and things like that. So I'm going to show you how I achieve that with not a whole lot of effort. And most of these are only going to be like maybe a couple nodes. So hopefully you'll understand after the end of this why I like this red IPP2 mapping method when I'm doing my grading, because I just think it makes things easier. First thing is we're going to go into our project settings, and usually you'll see, you know, your master settings. You should set your timeline resolution to what you want it to be and all those things, and your image scaling however you want to do it. But in color management, what you'll usually start out in is a timeline color space of probably Rec 709 2.4 or something like that. Maybe you like to work in log or whatever. And the color science up here option is going to be important to what we do. Some people like aces. I still don't really like this very much. I'll have to do maybe a video on it later when I figure out if there's anything beneficial to it, at least in my opinion. But DaVinci YRGB color managed is what I use, and the input color space, since on this one it's going to be the Blackmagic Design Pocket 4K. We're using the 4K film Gen 4, which should be in the newer DaVinci Resolve. The timeline color space, we're actually not going to use Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, and I'm going to show you why in a moment. The output color space is going to be Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, and we're going to leave this stuff alone. But we're going to come down here to timeline to output gamut mapping. We're going to go from none, it'll be default on none, but we're going to go to red IPP2 gamut mapping. We're going to set the output tone map to high. This will give us a starting point of a higher contrast. And highlight roll off we're going to set to soft. And we'll leave this alone, and we'll hit save. And you'll see that it kind of gets us a quick kind of grade. Now, obviously, we're not going to leave it this way. We're going to do a couple things with it. But what I want to do is show you why I don't want to work in Rec 709 for our timeline color space. So obviously I exposed a little high for my shot. So on this one, I'm going to pull down the exposure. And what I want to do is show you how saturated colors respond to timeline color spaces that differ from each other. Rec 709 is a very narrow gamut, and you'll see how that plays with our saturation here. So I'll just zoom in a little bit on it so you can get a clearer idea of what's happening. So in this node, I'm going to take the saturation all the way down. So you see, I'm not sure how good this is going to look on YouTube compression, but you see how there's this kind of splotchy ugliness, and there's a lot of detail loss in the reds. This is because the way that at least the Blackmagic Pocket 4K works with this, and basically with the Rec 709 timeline, is that the gamut is not wide enough for the colors that are captured. And you can see this here. It's almost like the reds are bleeding, right? So what I'm going to do instead is change the timeline color space from Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, and we're going to use Rec 2020 Gamma 2.4. So Rec 2020 is a much larger color gamut. So this should provide us with more information in our colors to play with. So we'll save that. There's no immediate change, right? But now watch what happens when I take the saturation down. You see how much more detail is in there? So if you're having issues with reds when you do stuff in the nodes, or the blues, especially like reds, blues, cyans with the Blackmagic cameras, just go ahead and, if you're using this method, change your timeline color space to Rec 2020 Gamma 2.4, and it will change it. The other videos I've made uses a log color space, but the Rec 2020 one I found works really well and lets you select more colors. It kind of feels more like you're working in Rec 709, but you have the larger color gamut, so you don't, you know, clip colors or any issues like that. So that's why we're going to use Rec 2020 for this one. And let's go back to the first shot. And the reason why I'm going to use this one first is because this is how I'm going to set my white balance. I'm not the best at eyeballing for my color temperature, so I try to use whatever's in the shot to my advantage. The first thing I'm going to do is pull down this exposure a bit to get it more in the, you know, from outer space. I tend to overexpose when I am in uncontrolled kind of situations like this where I can, because the noise levels just end up better, and with Blackmagic BRAW you don't really lose a lot by pulling the exposure down in post. So see, we've got a lot of really nice detail. If we go back to 0, you know, it might look like you lost detail, but, you know, bringing this exposure back down, you can see all that detail in there. It's really nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use this pen tool and grab some white from this flower. Now, you know, it's always better to have a card, but when I went to shoot this, I just did it for fun, you know? So I didn't bring a bunch of stuff with me. I just had the camera and kind of just went for it. So we'll go to our vector scope, and we'll punch it to 2x zoom, and we're going to bring those whites so we'll go full screen with it, and you can see how nice this is. I mean it's already in a kind of good space already, so there's not a whole lot that I'm going to do with it. I'll adjust the contrast, but that's really all that's required. So there's going to be a couple nodes I throw down. We'll do this and then add a parallel, and I'll show you. This one will basically be like a noise reduction node. I don't do that first. I'll throw it in later, but I don't do it before I do all this stuff because it will slow down everything. So we'll just do these first, and just know that you can do whatever noise reduction here. Some people do it at the end. Do it whenever you want. I find that it works better here because it makes the gradients, if you do grading between colors, to be a little smoother, and kind of makes it easier in the long run, but whichever works for you. So this one we're going to name contrast. This one we're going to call saturation. So what I'm going to do is, as I usually do, I will do the contrast of it first. Usually if you have a lower contrast situation like this, you're going to want to punch up that contrast a bit so it looks better. So I'm going to do lift. We'll get it around, let's say, here. And gain, we'll punch that up a little bit. Just slightly, about there. And do a before and after. Okay, so I mean, that's already looking really good. Luckily, because of the luminance levels on that flower, it already kind of stands out. So I already kind of like this. There's not a whole lot that I would want to do. What I could do, and I did this on a few shots, is I'll add a parallel node, and this on this one, what I'll do is add a little vignette, and we'll make the central point the flower, and we can make that as, you know, large as we want. Softness, we'll make it completely soft like that, and then we can take this and pull down the exposure, and then we'll invert the mask. So do before, after, before, after. So you can see how that can take kind of a flat looking shot and make it look more like you did it on purpose. Vignettes are used a lot for a reason. In photography, they're used quite often. With Blackmagic RAW, I've actually found that the great thing about the vignetting in this with RAW is that you get less like posterization and weird artifacts that show up, as long as you don't do it too much, obviously. But I found that this works really, really nicely. And if you noticed, I also did it on the luminance curve only. This is to not change the saturation when you pull the exposure down. So the reason why I have the saturation node in the middle, just in case you were wondering, for this shot, I actually kind of like the saturation the way it is, But what you could do is, because I used lift gamma gain instead of using like just the luminance curve, what it does is it actually changes the saturation. It'll add saturation quite a bit. And you might notice this if you just do overall contrast adjustments either in this tool or in lift gamma gain. And so this, you know, if you want to just kind of pull that saturation back in this node, you can just kind of inch it back a bit to where you're satisfied. So we'll just do before, after, before, after. So those yellows kind of lose their punch a bit more. Okay, so that's fine. I mean, that's why that node's there. For some people, even this can be a little too saturated for them, and you can just adjust that if you want. Sometimes I find it's easier to do lift gamma gain. Other times, if I want more control, I'll use the curve. It just depends. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor that too much. So what I'll do is I'll use Alt-1, go to the next shot, and then I'll use Control-1. And obviously that's not going to be great for this one, so we'll just go over here to the exposure and we'll punch this. We'll punch this up. And you know, obviously on this one, we don't want that vignette to do what it was doing. And we'll go to this contrast node and we'll make some adjustments. Bring that exposure back down. So we're just going to move this vignette over here. So that's without the grade, with the grade, without, with. And we'll actually pull up some of those shadows a bit here. Bring up the lift. Go over to our shadow. Bring that up slightly. So we still get more detail in those shadows. Okay. So this is pretty much what it looked like in the video. Okay, so this one I just adjusted the color temperature a little bit to look more natural. And then this vignette, we'll actually just turn that vignette off for now, like that. And we're gonna go over to our contrast and we're going to adjust this. All right, so that looks okay. So this one is more challenging because the reds. Now remember when I showed you in Rec 709 color space, you'd end up having to deal with a narrow gamut and it would be kind of difficult. And right now, like the reds look a little crazy to me. They're a little bit too much, and I don't remember if I made adjustments or not. I just kind of quickly graded everything for the Bee's Knees video. But for the reds here, they're a little bit too red, and I don't get a whole lot of detail in here, so I'm actually just going to call this red saturation. And remember, with contrast, if you're using lift gamma gain, you can add saturation. If you're looking down here at the vector scope, you can see how it kind of gets more saturated after the node is applied, you see. So what we're going to do is to kind of counterbalance the saturation in the reds, specifically because I'm okay with the greens really. I kind of like that, the kind of greens that pop out in these flower videos because it's kind of larger than life. But we're going to go to hue versus saturation. We're going to grab the reds and we're going to pull those down. Let's go around here. So before, after, before, after. Yeah, so if you look here, let's go into the petals. I think that when you kind of bring this saturation down, you actually get more detail, and it makes the shot look a bit more natural, even though these, I can tell you because I was there, these flowers were incredibly vibrant. But when you bring down the saturation a bit to kind of fit what our monitors can really handle, you end up with a lot more. It feels a lot richer, even though it's technically not, because you're bringing down saturation, but what I'm trying to show you is that the amount of latitude you have for bringing back color information and bringing it back down into kind of reality is a lot better than if you in the Rec 2020 than in the Rec 709. If you want me to do it again, I can just show you. If I go to Project Manager, go back to a Rec 709 2.4 color space, you'll see that it kind of adds this weird, see that like weird texturing? It just doesn't look right because it's just not enough of there's just not enough information in the color gamut. So by going to Rec 2020, that information comes back. So I hope that this is really clear to you guys. Sorry, that's my phone. I hope this is really clear to you guys and how this actually matters. Your timeline color space definitely matters. So we'll go before, after, and that's before the saturation adjustment and then after. So I like that. Vignette, let's just add this again because I kind of like these, and we'll move the vignette over here. Okay, so that's what we've got. Okay, so this one's going to be more interesting because of what actually was shot. So I'm going to put the exposure back. So this was incredibly flat. When I took this shot of the fish, this is legitimately what it looked like. It was very boring and not dramatic at all, okay? If we go to the waveform, you can see how flat this is. It's very, this is even after the red IPP2 gamut mapping and the high contrast and all that is applied. You can see how kind of boring this is. So we're gonna try to make this look more interesting and more dramatic, okay? So first thing, color temperature, this looks okay to me. I'll just leave it because the fish looks white and all that. We're gonna reset this, and we're just going to call this saturation, and the vignette, we're going to use that later. And for the contrast, I mean, look how much we need to kind of increase the contrast to make this look more dramatic. So let's kind of go to more of the subject of it, which is kind of this fish that I pretty much missed. Okay, so we're going to go here to the lift. We're going to bring, help if I turn that on. I'm going to bring that down quite a bit. Now, when you're using codecs that are not very robust, doing this will cause some real issues, okay? But Blackmagic BRAW can kind of deal with having the saturation pulled quite a bit, or the contrast pulled quite a bit. So, okay, so that already looks quite a bit better. But we're going to do a global contrast adjustment too to kind of add more. All right, and we'll play with the pivot to kind of get it around there. Okay, so before, after, before, after, before, after. Okay, so remember what I said about the saturation. Let's actually bring it back. Watch this vector scope. Okay, you can see how much saturation is being added to this, right? And you can see that the reds get hit quite significantly harder than everything else. So we're gonna, go in here. We're actually gonna bring the global saturation down. Go back to our vector scope. We're gonna do a little of this, and then we're also gonna go over. Where is it? Hit that. Go to the reds. Bring that down a bit. About there. Before, after, before, after. So you can see how that cartoony red kind of gets cooled off. Okay. And it's especially apparent here. You can see how it, feels like there's texture loss and all that, but when we kind of bring it back down, it looks a bit better. I don't remember if I did this on the version that I put online, but you can pull out if you're worried that this kind of saturation is too much. You can always bring it back and make it more natural. Okay, so there's that. And the last thing is going to be the vignette. And on this one, and you can see how dramatic that already makes it look. So we're actually going to change the shape of this. We're going to have it be this kind of oval in the center. Bring that more about here. We're going to bring it out. We'll put it there because really the subject of the shot is more this guy, but let's look at how it reacts. Yeah, that's about right. So let's look at this. So this is before, after, okay? So you can get an idea of how much, flexibility you can have. Even little things like this can add a lot of production value to the project, even though it doesn't really take all that much effort or time. I guess the very last thing that I would do, obviously, if you need to denoise, do your denoising here. On the timeline, generally, I will throw in my secret sauce, which is not that secret. You just go over to your sharpening, go to 0.48. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I have been asked why my footage looks so much crisper or cleaner or sharper than a lot of other people's online, and I'm not doing anything special. All I'm doing is adding, sharpening at the end. You can also add a little bit of mid-tone detail if you want, maybe like a 15. I didn't do this for this one, but you can add that to kind of add that little bit of extra texture if you want. So I recommend that you guys try this out and get back to me if this doesn't work for you. I would really like to know, because I've been using this on a lot of projects and I find it way easier to get stuff done quickly, which is my major thing. So if you're struggling to understand why this is helpful, or like you're not liking it for some reason, or it's not working well for you, then please let me know. And maybe there's something that you're doing or a part of the process that you're missing that is a problem. Or maybe it's just not going to work for you, right? Maybe there's just a method that you like better. But I kind of like this. I think it makes it very easy. And you can get a lot done with very little effort if you use this method. At least I think so. So that's it. That's all I've got for you, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you guys next time.